So let's continue this, and we're going to start with the banana kit for now. And as always, let's use references. I've gathered the references in here and I will use them. So again, for the opacity fix, let me delete this one as well. We're going to drag this layer, affect the opacity only, and add a black mask with a fill layer. And let's search for banana and use its opacity. And I'm going to add a levels, invert it, and in here drag the opacity down. So we're only seeing this. And again, I'm going to create a folder, and in the folder add a black mask and a fill layer, and use this one so that it only affects the colors in the opacity range and doesn't go beyond. Okay, this one is good. And now let's give it some main colors. Add a folder and call this one main. So let's go for some colors. And I really like this deep color, this deep green color that it has. Let's pick it. Okay, this one is good for these. Let's add a black mask and start to paint to select this area. Okay, only select these. And for the next one, let's give it another type of green, which is something like this. Only activate the color. And let's pick up this perfect green for this one. And now let's add a black mask again and just paint on these areas. Okay, selected these, and now let's find another tune, and I'm going to make it something in between those. And this one I believe is alright for the third one. So let's pick up something from here. Only color. Okay, and add a black mask and paint on these parts only. So now I believe the colors really look like each other, and I'm going to fix them later. Just let's paint a mask in here. And I wished really I could have baked the ID mask, but we're done from the baking and just some painting need to be done. So these two look like each other very much, and I'm going to pick another color. Let's pick from here, pick from a shade that is in between those. Okay, this live green will do. So there's one thing that I can tell is that we're going to paint a lot of damage onto this banana. You see, there are a lot of damage in these edge areas, which we're doing right now. But before that, let's give them some color variation on all of them. So let's give the color variation. And now that I'm looking at the reference, you see there are a lot of these yellow patches that is visible on these. So let's do this. So let's go and select the color from there. Something like this. And add a roughness and bring the roughness up because this is so rough when I'm looking compared to the color of the whole banana. Add a black mask and fill layer, and I'm going to use from procedurals, and I'm going to select one that has color swatches in there. This one is alright. Okay, This is perfect, really adding a good color swatch in there. Let's visualize the mask, and it's alright. Really, I'm happy with the effect. But I'm going to add a warp to make it less CG. So something like this is alright. And of course, I can tell that I can get a better color result using multiply, but not multiply. Let's use another one. Just cycle through all of the modes to see which one you get a better result with. Okay, this tint is alright, and it's going to localize the color based on the color that is beneath it, and it's really doing a great job. So the color is so present in here, I'm going to make it less present. I can use a procedural to subtract from that. So let's use a procedural like this and try to subtract from that. And now let's look at it. And by making the subtract effect stronger, I'm able to delete more of that. So let's bring the subtract down a bit to something like this. And now I can add a paint layer and try to manually chip some of the areas that are so present. So this one right here, I can take away from that, and I can toggle on between X to remove and paint at the same time on areas that I like. For example, on this one, I can really remove from these edges because later on I'm going to add to the edges. And let's hit X on this one and try to paint a swatch on this. And really just try to look and see what works and what not. Okay, this is already starting to look good, and now let's add other layers to make the sculpting pop up a bit. So only activate the color, and let me, if I can, activate the height on this to see what happens. Let's make it additive instead of subtractive, but only adding just a small bit of height, not so much. And go into the normal map, and it's good in adding this. Okay, now let's go for this one and start to concentrate a bit on the edges. So let's give this mask. Okay, starting to look good. And now we should really care a bit about the color selection of this one, because this one is really important and affecting all of them. So I'm going to select a green like this. Let me pick from these and compare before and after. And let's make the color the multiply. And of course I'm going to make it not so intense. And I believe it's good in adding those highlight edges that I want from these bananas. And let's add a roughness, and let's not make it so rough. And now let's add some high frequency detail for close-ups as well. So let's add a sharpen. Let's call this one sharpen. make it pass through. Of course, this one is a paint layer, not a fill layer. And add a filter, and from this let's select sharpen, and it adds another layer of sharpness into this. And let's select this, Control and C, and I believe I can paste it. Let me see. I can paste it on this layer as well. It's a fern, and let's paint it here. Before and after. Okay, it's added a bit of sharpness into that as well. And the grass has the sharpness as well. So I'm happy with this. Let's only visualize the banana. Okay, and now let's add those edge chippingness in here, which we expected on the edges. And we can use the same method that we painted the edge effects on the grass, which is going to this opacity mask. Let's call this opacity, and in here try to add a paint layer and start to chip away some of the edges. Okay, and the whole point is to remove these CG lines that you see in here. The lines are so pixel perfect and I really do not want that. Just add some slight noise in them to break the edges. And it takes a bit of time, but the result is going to be worth it. Just paint on the parts that you want. So let's see. I'm happy with this. For now, let's add a anchor point in here so that we can reference it later on. And again, beneath this sharpness layer, I'm going to add this rust layer. No, not this one. Let's drag it instead of selecting it. Okay, let's add a black mask, fill layer, and instead of using a procedural, go for anchor point. And whenever we try to paint there, we're getting this as well. So I'm going to make it multi-layer. Let's take this one and make it a bit lighter. Okay, this is the perfect color for it, exactly what I wanted. And again, copy this layer and bring this one down. So one click on it to take it back to its original form. And now let's go to the mask and visualize the mask. And I'm going to add a filter and add a bubble. Add a slight bubble so that it goes a bit beyond the painted mask. And now let's see the effect. And now you see we only first add a light and then add a dark. You see, this is what is happening here. It first tries to add a light layer and a dark layer afterward. So again in here, to make sure that we get rid of this on the edges, we come to this fill layer and add a fill, bring the opacity mask and set the mode to multiply so that it takes care of the edges and only happening effect on places when we paint. So we created that, and let's go in here and start to paint again. And now whenever we paint, we are getting that effect that we wanted, a two-layer mask, and perfect for adding the details. So let's try to chip away the edges. And this is really, when I'm looking at the references, it's really common in banana to have this effect, which is you see right here. So let's continue to paint on the edges. And of course the anchor point that we have referenced here, and we have referenced it there, the reference layer should be above the anchor point itself. And if we drag this one beneath this, it's not really going to work. The anchor reference should be above the anchor point itself in the layer stack. You should have that in mind as well. So just some edge painting, and let's try not to make it too noisy. If you start to make all of the places have the same effect, it's going to look a bit noisy. Just be selective on where you add it. Okay, just try to randomly paint on some areas and try to get rid of these edges on some parts as well. And this is the beauty of having references. If you look at a lot of references before executing, you're getting really ahead of the project, and you will get a lot of good things happening when you look at the reference. And as long as you have the idea, the tool that is really there. Just try to have the idea and reference before coming into here, and you're good to go really. And just try to paint on these parts, and bear with me, it's going to be worth the effect. Let's go crazy on this and try to really push this area, because these are some identical parts. If we try to add so much variation, we can also hide the identity as well. For example, removing this part totally. Excuse me. You see, by removing this, we have now introduced a new level of realism into that. So let's chip the base as well, and make your brush size bigger so that you're able to paint faster. And these tropical plants are, I believe, one of the hardest in terms of plant creation, because they are a lot more different than normal plants that we create inside games. They have different tone of colors, they have different characteristics, and really different plants to be created. So this one is done as well. Let's add something in here, and I can really totally remove this part. And because these are repeated just upside down, I can really introduce a new amount of variation by altering the textures so much. And you see these two are identical, but we have made them different enough. And as I told you in Blender part, that later on inside Substance we try to add a lot of variation in texture creation. And this is really a power of it. The number of tools that you can use to create variation is really powerful. You can use Substance, you can use ZBrush, you can use Blender, and in every situation you can add as much variation as you want. Okay, let's paint some of these areas out. And try to leave some of them untouched. For example, these two untouched, some of them really touched, and some of them in between. So let's hit X to reveal this part. And of course, delete that mask part. We want the base to be there. And speaking of base, let me create a new layer in here. And let's look at the base. Look at the main stem. I want to add another layer. Let's copy this layer and add a black mask, and try to paint on these stem parts as well. I just now want to highlight the stem parts, and later on, if we needed to change the color, we will change it. And I believe we're going to change the color because the color isn't so greenish. Just try to paint randomly to support the randomness as well. Okay, we're now hitting only the stem parts. And I believe for the color we're going to change it as well because these are really not just like the reference files. So for the color, let's go and pick something from here. Yeah, this one is alright. And making the color really different to the color of the leaves. Okay, for the banana, I believe it's good. Of course, we can add some height variation to make that even more better. Just try to save incrementally so that you do not lose any progress. Because Substance sometimes tends to crash and it really hurts to hurt progress. And let's add another layer. And on this layer, I'm only going to affect the height. Let's go into these masks and pick something and just manipulate the height. I want something to highlight the edges because you see there are a lot of height variation there. Let's add this edge as strong. It's good, but let's add the effect stronger, but don't really be afraid because we're adding a blur to this to make this look more natural. Just make it a bit stronger, and on the sharpen I'm going to delete it and instead add a filter and add a blur to make the height variation there as well. Make it a bit rougher. Okay, now let's work with the blur. You see this is unblurred, and the moment we start to add the blur, it starts to look a lot better. Okay, this one is for the banana, I believe. Later on, if we needed to fix something, we will come back and fix it later. So let's see, show all of them. And the last one is this palm kit that we need to take care of. So show only that. And again, let's add the opacity. Affect only the opacity channel. Add a black mask. Fill and select the respective opacity in here, which is the palm. And bring the opacity down. And in here I need to invert the effect. Okay, done. And now let's add a folder. Of course, I don't want this one to be a part of this folder. Add a black mask, fill, and this palm to restrict the colors that we create only to this opacity area. So let's go for palm, and I'm going to change the references. And I'm going to create a couple of variations from this as well. One live and one dead. Okay, for the living one, let's pick the color from here. It's alright, and perfectly the color that I want. And let's mask them. I want this one, I want these two ones to be alive and these two dead. So let's add a paint. I want to mask these two to be alive and these two dead. Okay, mask these two, and now let's add a base color for the dead ones. And I'm going to pick something brownish, something from here. So only the color. You can hold down Alt on a single channel and click to only activate that channel. So for the dead ones also, this one is alright, but I feel like I need to change the color. Let's pick it from this one instead. This has a darker brown. That will help a lot. Okay, something like this. And for the brown, for the roughness, I'm going to make it really rough because the dried plant really doesn't have any roughness to it. So let's select this mask with copy mask and add the black mask in here and paste into mask. Add the levels, invert it so that it selects that one. So let's again add a paint layer, add a fill layer, add a black mask, and I'm going to highlight these stem parts in here. So let's try to paint on the stem part really carefully. Okay, this is for it, and for this one as well. It's a lot easier because it's so straight. The selection of it is easier. And you can also select some of these parts as well to make the connection point pop out more. Okay, something like this. And now let's see which color we can give that. I'm going for something lighter. Only the color. No. Okay, this one is alright. A good indication in there. And for this one as well, let me pick from those live ones. I'm going to select color like this. Only the color and a bit of roughness with high roughness amount, and I'm going to add a black mask and a paint and start to paint on these areas. Okay, just try to highlight these parts and some connection points as well. Because you see these parts have a little bit of color injection in here. So I'm going to select the color from here. Just pick something like this, okay? This is alright, and this is good for adding the base color. And now let's add those noisy colors that we know. Let's select all of them and put them in a folder and call them main. And right away let's add a sharpness, add a fill layer, paint layer, filter, and sharpen. It's too much, let's make it something like this and make it pass through. Okay, now we're ready to start adding those colors in. Okay, let's go beneath it and start to paint the layers. First, let's try the color. look at a procedural, go for something procedural, and start to pick from there. For example, this is good for adding those details. But let's change the color first to see what we come up with. To something like here. Color to multiply. It already starts to darken some of the parts which I really like. And let's select the color because it's already too strong. I'm going to add a fill and select one of these procedurals really randomly. I do not have a specific one in mind. So let's select this one and try to subtract it from it to chip away some of that. And add a roughness and play with roughness a bit. Okay, and now let's add another white color to highlight these edges as well. Okay, and I feel like it has highlighted wrong parts. Let me select it, add levels after that, and invert it. And I can really take that and make it a bit less strong. Okay, this one is alright. And let's pick a color from these brown parts. Okay, it's starting to come together, and I'm not really going to add a lot of noise into this, but something so slightly. So another color. Let's go pick some random procedurals to see which one of them looks better. No, it's only a matter of selecting procedurals, testing colors on them to see if one of them works or not. So this one is looking good. We need to pick a color. Okay, and it starts to give this color illusion of these colors being decayed out, and it's really good. Let's make it a multiply, darker on some parts and lighter on some parts as well. So let's add some fibers, add a layer, only the color, and of course the height maybe. Add a black mask, and again pick one of those directionals. For example, this one. Okay, it's looking alright, but I need to bring the contrast up. I want something just so slightly. Okay, and now let's give the height a bit of variation. Let's bring this in and up. Roughness, bring the roughness up. And choose one of these colors. One of these dead colors. And roughness height needs to be manipulated just a bit. Okay, and now let's look at all of them. And I feel like I'm really happy with the foliage that we have created, and now we are left with only this bark. And one thing to note is that we keep this substance file so that later on, if we needed to add more detail, we come back and add those details in. So for now, I'm really happy with the details, and let's go for this bark kit. And this is real geometry and a bit more different to handle, because on those parts we really added some procedurals, but on this one we are really caring about the geometry. And of course procedurals and these smart masks as well. So let's select this bark, or a bark that I'm happy with the color. These three are good to my taste. I'm happy really with their color. So let's add a base color for all of them and pick the base from here. Pick one of these lighter tones. Okay, this is alright. And of course this one is going to be pretty rough. Let's add a lot of roughness into this, but we're not going totally to 1, because even the roughest object has some specularity to them. So bring the roughness down a bit, and now let's add some procedurals to give this as much detail as needed, and then later on use this a smart mask to really make the color belong to the geometry, because these really use the geometry so well in terms of making the color so localized. So let's pick another color from here and start to give the roughness as variation as well. Add a black mask and a fill layer. And I'm going to copy this, but of course let's make the color so pronounced. I'm going to use this color because it's so different to the tone to the others, and select this layer, and every time paste this layer, choose another mask, change the color and roughness to get something that works fine. So let's go for color picking from these, and in here in this fill, choose a procedural. Just write procedure and all of them will appear on here. And you can also go into the base color and visit what you have created. So I'm happy with this. Let's paste another layer and go and choose another procedural. And just see where the effect has been applied, and then you're good to go and select another color. Okay, and you see the color differentiation that it has created. Again, paste the layer, go into procedural, see something that works fine, and try to give it another color. And you're not really bound to this, you can use these ones as well. For example, let's pick the color from here to give it that tone. Yeah, really that works. So this layering strategy works really fine in terms of giving this a lot of realism. Bring the balance down and pick one of these areas. And give it a bit of roughness variation. Paste the layer again, select the procedural, and choose the color which you like. So before adding the procedurals, it's really for adding these smart masks, it's really looking procedural, but the moment you start to add those smart masks, it starts to take shape. So just bear with me for a couple of seconds when we are selecting these. So I'm going for these darker shades as well. Let's pick something from here and go for these ones as well. And now let's look at the base color, and we're getting richer in terms of base color. So let's add the layer again, select the fill layer. No, not this one. Let's go for something else. Okay, this one is alright as well. Let's pick some of these lighter ones. Okay, this is good for base. Let's select them all, give them another folder. Let's call it base. And of course, we can go and add more layers, but for now it's enough. And add a fill, add a paint mask. Let's call it sharpen. Add a filter and choose sharpen. And of course, you should make this one pass through. And we really do not want so much sharpness, just a bit. Not so much, something to pop up the color more. So now it's time I remove this one and select this layer only. And now it's time to pick up from these colors to make this so localized to the geometry. You see, it has selected the geometry colors for us. And the mask is based on geometry really. And pick one of these. Okay. And I can really turn the color down a bit. Paste the color again. And now use other ones to see what you come up with. For example, this one is alright. Adding the darkness to those crevices, it's a good thing. Let's pick from this area. Okay, and now let's add again. This one is so strong, I'm not really picking that. Okay, this one as well. Let's bring the balance down and I start to pick a color from here. Okay, I feel like it's looking good, but we need to highlight the edges more to give this a more illusion of what is going on in here. So I'm going for some of those edges, not this one. I'm just going for something to represent the shape, to highlight the shapes. So let's bring the balance down. Yeah, this is good. And now let's pick a color from these parts, from these lighter ones. I'm going to pick from here. Now you see it really started to highlight the edges. And I'm really happy with how this is going. So let's bring this down a bit, just so slightly. And I want another layer of edge highlight. Let me see. Yeah, this one is alright as well. Only the color and a bit of roughness variation. This time I'm going for a darker one. And what I can do really is to go in here and add a paint layer in the mask so that I can paint a bit on these parts as well. A bit of random paint on these parts to make the edges highlight a bit more. I'm just being so random and go cover the edges on these seam parts because I really want some edge highlight on these, and this will give me that separation. Okay, rotate the color to be able to visit this area better, and later on when we try to add this into Unreal we will see this result. And of course we may have to change some colors so that it works better, who knows. Okay, just some more variation. I'm just going to highlight these edges so that when we stack them on top of each other they are identifiable from each other. I'm not really being so careful with the color paint. Okay, and I believe this is the last one here. This one is the last one, and whenever procedurals didn't work you can really go and paint some hand details, hand painted details to make this whatever you want to be. And these hand painted details are really what brings your texturing to a next level alongside with procedurals. You can go halfway with procedurals, but if you want the ultimate realistic result, you want to have some hand placed details in there. Okay, and now the edges have been highlighted as well. I'm going to save it, and now it's time to export these textures into Substance and do the, into Blender and do the 3D modeling there. We're going to kit bash these and create what we want there. So it's time to export these, and now let's go to export textures. And for output template, I'm going to use the one that we created, this packed OpenGL. And if you look at it here, it's the same thing, but for the normal, we replace the OpenGL normal with the DirectX so that we can flip that inside Unreal. So we're going to use the same thing on this as well. And let's put the output to 4K. And I'm going to give them a export direction. And now let's look at the template, and for the naming it's going to use the t underscore mesh underscore texture set, and it's going to be perfect. It's going to use this texture set in the naming. So let's hit export, and for the dilation also you want to set it to infinite to create a padding. Okay, it's going to now take a bit of time to export this, and I'm going to be back when the exporting is done. Okay, this is our export folder, and we're going to do some things with these. I'm going to take these and create a padding for these, because later on inside Unreal, when we zoom out of these, it's going to mip map some of the pixels, and it's going to borrow a couple of pixels from these to color the mesh from outside. So we're going to create a padding as well in Photoshop. But an easier fix would be done inside Substance Designer. For exporting these, I'm going to disable the mask. I'm going to right click on this folder mask, and you hit toggle mask, and it's going to disable this mask so that the information you see on here is going to be exported. You see a lot of colors in here, and that is going to be exported for us. So let me select all of them. I'm going to use this because I believe it's a lot better than using Photoshop. So this is the bark. It actually has the geometry. And for the next one, let me select this fern, and on the folder mask, when we created that, I'm going to disable the mask as well. And on this one, I'm going to disable the mask, and on this one as well. And then we go for export now. Let's go for export, and using the same settings and same everything, let's hit export. And you see, for now it's not showing anything because the alpha has been taken into consideration, and I'm taking the base color of each of them, of these ones. Okay, and these ones I'm dragging them into Substance Designer. Let me drag them and link them. And this one is also procedural as well. And I mean, by correcting one of them, I'm able to take all of them. So you see, this one is in here, and there are color paddings in here, but the color padding really isn't what we want for this one. We want the color padding to be the same color as this one. So let me check others as well. This one is all right. We're not doing anything with it. This one, we need to fix it, and we want to make it something like green. And this one is somehow all right. Okay, we really do not want to do anything with this. The only ones that we want to correct are these. So let me take this because it already has the padding. We want to correct the padding. You drag a node out and search for a split, and then in here you're going to get alpha split. You get one RGB and one alpha. So drag this one out and go for a blend, and drag a node out, go for HSL and drag it in here. And we're going to use this mask to separate between these. So now let's just select a blend and try to manipulate the HSL. No, we're doing it the wrong way. Select these two nodes and hit X so that it converts them to something else. So now select this one to see the blend, double click on it, and a single click on this one to be able to change the color padding. Now you see, based on the mask, we are changing the color padding of this one to be something that is more towards what we wanted. Just let's select something a bit greenish, a bit dark green. Something like this is alright, so that when we zoom out, it's going to pick this color. Okay, now I'm going to take this and simply save it and overwrite it with the previous one. Or first, let's drag a node out and again search for alpha, and this time alpha merge. And now merge this alpha so that we get our texture back with the alpha, but the color padding is corrected as well. So I'm going to export this one as well. And I'm going to overwrite it with this. Okay, this one is going to export now. Done. And you see this error because we have linked this one and it has overwritten this one already. So let's connect this one into here. This is the mask. And let's delete this HSL and bring another HSL and connect it in here. And now we need to manipulate the HSL to get something more like the colors of the grass blades. We want to go for something a bit green. Okay, something like this will do. So now this is the result, and with alpha I'm going to hit save and overwrite it with this one. So gonna take a bit of time to calculate. Now we have the result and we're ready to close this one out and open in Blender. And as always, I drag this one in, and now I'm going to bring the texture file. And one add-on that will help us bring the PNG texture file is this one. If you go to the preference and this add-on, just search for images as planes, and this add-on you activate it, and you simply create, you hit Shift and A, and in this image hit image as planes. Then it's going to require you to pick a texture. I'm going to pick this base color. Okay, and now let's go to material preview. You see the base color with the alpha has been set for us, and to see that you really have to go into the material preview, and we have this material in here. Let's go for another image as plane, and this time select this one. No, this one is the bark. We really do not need this one to be like that. And now let's go for fern. Okay, now again image as plane. Now grass, and then one more thing that we need to do is this palm one. Okay, it has now perfectly set up these materials for us, and with the alpha as well. And the good thing is that we really do not need to do any shader work or things like that to get these alphas to work. So now there's one more thing remaining, and I have to bring the low poly mesh that we baked into Substance. I'm in this low poly file, and we're getting all of these. I'm going to take this, delete all of them but these 4 ones. And these are the ones that we're going to use for texturing, for creating the bark. So let me take one of them. All of them use the same material. So on the base color, hit image texture and hit open. And from here, just select the bark material. Okay, this is the bark, and these are the low poly planes that we are ready to start cutting and creating things on. Okay, now I'm going to save, take a backup, and start creating process in the next lesson. Okay, see you there.